Hello and welcome. Do you hear me? Yes, good. Welcome everybody to this online session titled Arts and Democracy, What's at Stake Today? My name is Louis Valente and I'm the Secretary General of ACETES International, the International Association of Performing Arts for Children and Young People. I have the honor of welcoming you to this first online session of the Performing Arts Coalition. Welcome to the members of the 5 networks. Welcome to the representatives of the EU Commission, and welcome to all other colleagues and artists who have joined today. During the next 90 minutes, you will meet a representative of each of the 5 networks in the coalition. Eva from the European Dance Development Network, Alice from Circus Strada, the European Network for Contemporary Circus and Outdoor Arts, Catherine from the European Festival Association, Ausa from IETM, the International Network for Contemporary Performing Arts, and Elena, who is our policy expert and researcher. Collectively, we are the hosts of this session. The purpose of today is to initiate a shared efforts across the 5 networks and their membership to address some of the major questions of our sector. Which challenges do artists face today? How do we protect artistic freedom? Which cultural rights are being overlooked? What must change for culture really to function as a public good, accessible to all? The purpose of responding to these questions is to inspire change. In a European context, prominently to feed into the newly released Culture Compass for Europe, as well as the emerging Agora EU program that will define the role and budget for culture in the next multi-annual budget of the European Union. We also really wish to qualify the conversation about how change can be achieved in a combination of the international efforts by the 5 networks and the EU, and action by artists and institutions at national and local levels. We believe this is how large-scale change and lasting impact can be achieved. So, the program of the session today is the following. We begin with a short introduction of the Performing Arts Coalition, of PAC. We then lay the groundwork with a presentation of the research produced in PAC based on knowledge that many of you have generously shared through the responses you made to a questionnaire about cultural rights that was circulated last spring. We then go to a perspective from the EU Commission, today articulated by the head of the Cultural Policies Department in the Directorate General for Education and Culture. After this, we will take a tour of 5 snapshots from different parts of Europe and lived experiences of what today's topic mean in their context and the learning they propose us to consider. Finally, we will have a session for questions and comments from everybody present. Because of the large number of registrations for the session today, almost 500, we have decided to organize it as a webinar, which technically means that only panelists can speak. So it will work in the way that you write your questions and comments in the chat throughout the session. We will collect all of them and read out loud and moderate as many as time allows us in the final part of this webinar. If you have a question for a specific speaker, please put your name first before the name of the speaker first before the question. And we really wish to hear from you, so please write your questions and comments in the chat. We will be speaking in English. If you need translation or captions, please go to the Zoom menu bar on the bottom of your screen and choose Show Captions. You may need to click on More before you can find the button called Show Captions. You can press on the small arrow under Show Captions to activate translation and choose your language. Okay, let's get started. Eva, I pass the word to you.
Thank you, Louis, and hello, everyone. Welcome. So I will briefly introduce PAC, the Performing Arts Coalition. PAC is a collaboration between 5 performing arts networks that you just heard, and together we connect more than thousands of organizations and professionals working in over 90 countries worldwide. PAC is not a new organization. It's a platform we have created to work together in a more structured and sustained way on issues we clearly share. So PAC exists within the Creative Europe network projects on the 5 partners. This means it's a project-based and time-bound collaboration that builds upon long-standing relationship. By many of us have already worked closely together in initiatives such as Perform Europe and through years of advocacy and support for artists and organizations across our respective fields. So why did we decide to create PAC? Across our networks, in a very different national and political context, we are observing similar challenges and pressing issues faced by the performing arts sector. Rather than addressing these challenges only within our individual networks, we felt there is a real need to pool our knowledge, our data, our relationships, and to coordinate our advocacy efforts where it makes sense. And PAC is our way to do that. So concretely, it allows us to conduct sectorial dialogues and joint research on key policy questions for the performing arts, to exchange knowledge and tools across networks and geographies, to develop shared advocacy messages, and where it makes sense, to contribute a more coherent and better informed voice to policy discussions, while still staying in the diversity of memberships and in dialogue with the wider performing arts ecosystem. At its core, our mission is to be one of several voices, working to strengthen the role of performing arts in society. And we do this by advocating for policies that recognize their unique value as a public spaces for freedom of expression, artistic experimentation, and social encounter. The report we are presenting today, it is the first outcome of our multi-year PAC research trajectory. Over the coming years, we will explore several interlinked themes. For this initial circle, we choose to focus on artistic freedom and cultural rights, because across all our networks, we see that issues such as censorship, self-censorship, political pressure, and safe working conditions are becoming increasingly urgent, both in Europe and beyond. So, in short, to summarize it, PAC is a joint platform of 5 existing networks created within their Creative Europe projects. It's aimed to deepen collaboration on advocacy, research, and resource sharing around the performing arts, and it seeks to strengthen the visibility and recognition of the performing arts' unique value. With that framing in mind, we can now turn to the substance of the first PAC report. I will now give the floor to Elena Polivtseva, independent cultural policy researcher and the author of our report, who will guide us through the main findings of the research.
Thank you, Eva. Can you hear me? Can you just, anyone note? Yes, thank you very much. So I'm trying to share my slides. Does it work? Yes. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. As Eva said, the report that we're going to present this afternoon is a snapshot of reality from the field, the snapshot of voices from the performing arts from Europe and beyond. Over the past months, we were surveying performing arts professionals in Europe and beyond. We asked them about the concrete problems they face with artistic freedom and cultural rights. We asked them to describe the pressures, the threats and barriers when it comes to artistic freedom, and also moments in which it feels like freedom is fragile or when it's already lost. In order to place these lived experiences within a context, we also conducted some desk research to complement this picture with some political and wider economic trends. So, of course, the picture that emerged is not coherent, it's not comprehensive, and it's also not single. But this picture is a very important signal of what is actually happening today with performing arts fields in Europe and also in some other countries. So, but before I turn to the concrete findings of our reports, maybe let's take a step back and try to think what kind of reality are we living in now and where are we trying to figure out artistic freedom, in what kind of context are we thinking about it? In the past few years, we have been talking a lot about major crises. But what I'm noticing recently, there have also been kind of collective political recognition that there is something missing, honesty about the system that have not been working for a long time, and honesty about not pretending at which cost it is happening. Indeed, we need some freedom to speak up about how power works, about what is broken, about who pays the price. I guess many of you listened to the speech at Davos of Canadian Prime Minister who spoke about exactly about that, about the need to stop pretending the systems work and still function, and about what courage it takes to actually stand up for our values. He spoke about the honesty about the world as it is. Last year, Ursula von der Leyen, European Commission President, in her State of the Union speech, spoke about independence moment for Europe. This is in fact also the title of the work program of the European Commission for 2026. Independence is meant freedom, agency, strength of Europe to stand up for its values and for look its own future in these shifting geopolitical realities. Of course, honesty, independence, all this takes courage and also takes freedom. Interestingly, there were also some ideas shared about reframing Green Deal as a freedom deal, as was reflected by Teresa Ribeira in the media. So it looks like that there is a call for honesty and independence. And as Ursula von der Leyen was speaking in her State of the Union speech, freedom of expression, democracy, rule of law are all the foundations of this independent and free Europe. It's a very interesting focus on honesty and independence, but it's also raises some questions. If we speak about honesty and independence at the level of states and institutions, what about citizens? What about artists? Those whose role is precisely to imagine, to question, to disturb, and to expand perhaps the space of freedom. Because this renewed political discourse, this new political language, is also unfolding at a quite disturbing backdrop. According to the Global Expression Report of last year, freedom of expression is under threat across the world. In fact, more than 2/3 of population have less freedom today than they had a decade ago. The state of democracy is also not very positive. According to the Economist Intelligence Unit, the democracy index has fallen dramatically in the past 20 years. It started around 2007, but then around the pandemic, this decline has accelerated and actually has never recovered to the pre-pandemic levels. Of course, Europe and let's say in general Western world is still the space where democracy and rule of law go relatively strong. However, how many times have we heard this phrase, at least for those who follow the speeches at the EU level, that European democracy is under threat? And also, according to the Eurobarometer, almost half of European citizens are not satisfied with how democracy functions in their countries. Of course, artistic freedom is not immune to these trends. Our study has revealed what organizations like Free Muse have been documenting for decades: growing pressure on artistic freedom, not only globally, but also here in Europe, including in countries where freedoms were once considered secure. According to our survey, almost half of respondents think that freedom of artistic expression is under threat. 33% of them have experienced censorship by public authorities or sponsors in recent past. This is, of course, about direct bans, but more often about subtle means, such as defunding, changing criteria, and also procedural exclusions. Many describe a landscape in which the most critical, experimental, and politically challenging voices, but also minority voices, are quietly pushed out, not through prohibition, perhaps, but through administrative complexity, opaque criteria, or chronic defunding. There are also legal changes that are happening in some countries, which are affecting not only cultural policy field or artistic freedom, but freedoms in general, especially freedoms of certain groups. But there are also media campaigns being raged at cultural institutions and artists. The strategy that cultural sector seem to be adopting is self-censorship. 37% of our respondents said that they self-censored themselves in the recent past. And 30% of our respondents said that they see this trend within the field. Perhaps they haven't had to do it themselves, but they noticed this signal within the peer community. So self-censorship is typically discussed in the context of funding. So what is happening is the language of funding applications is being adjusted or describing your project to the public. Names are being removed, ideas are being reframed, risky concepts are being softened, and actually projects are being abandoned, not for the lack of value or relevance, but for the lack of safety. In some countries, respondents spoke of the need to maintain a good profile to the funder. So they have to avoid criticism, they stay agreeable, comfortable, not to disturb. And also, even where this is not happening yet, the lack of funding and the growing gap of funding makes the boxes within which artists have to fit in, these boxes become tighter. The less money we have, the tighter the boxes of funders become. So this does not always mean silencing oneself completely, but it does mean imagining the reaction of conservative audiences, of political actors or administrators. This imagining of these reactions has become a part of creative process itself. So how creative? Of course, artists and cultural professionals haven't been silent about it. There have been a lot of online campaigns, protests, and manifestations, declarations, which were talking about these problems. And it seems that at the political level, at the EU level, this problem has been heard because artistic freedom is now quite a visible part of political discourse at the EU level. It has been embraced in the Work Plan for Culture of the EU 2023-26. Artistic freedom is also a strategic objective of the future Agora EU, which is likely to replace Creative Europe. Culture Compass for Europe is a new strategic framework of the European Union, which was published last year, at the end of last year, which also places a significant focus on artistic freedom. And importantly, the European Union's new democracy strategy, European Democracy Shield, is mentioning artistic freedom. It is now a component of democratic fabric and resilience. This is important because maybe this is one of the few or one of the first non-cultural policy documents at the EU level which mentions artistic freedom as such. So there is on the one hand logical development, so politicians, policymakers hear what artists tell them, but there are still some structured misunderstanding going on, and not only between artists and policymakers, but within the art fields and within policymakers independently. Too often we see artistic freedom still as in a negative terms, of freedom from oppression, freedom from censorship. As long as no one is officially banned, arrested or censored, freedom is assumed to exist. However, the reality is much more complex than that. Some artists never have the chance, the conditions to speak in the first place. Some communities never get access to cultural spaces or to artistic education, to artistic careers. Some practices never become visible enough to be censored. So in systems that are marked by precarity, defunding, poorly regulated digitalization and eroding cultural infrastructure, many voices actually don't get to speak at all, and not let alone to be noticed or then censored. So that's why in our research, we looked at artistic freedom in a more complex way. We also looked at the engagement with the arts, both as actors, as creators, but also as audiences. So we asked our respondents, how do they look at the current people's possibility, people's right to freely engage with the arts in Europe and beyond. More than half of our respondents signal that people's right to freely engage with the performing arts is under threat. And there are many reasons that lead to this reality, but not so surprisingly, the reason number one was flagged is funding. So degradation of public funding is the most damaging factor currently affecting artistic freedom today and people's engagement with the arts. Why? Because when you don't have enough resources, artists and cultural institutions are compelled to think about in market terms. They don't have spaces and time to engage with less represented communities, with less obvious practices. They don't have trust from policymakers to embrace those who are currently not yet part of their audiences. And like this kind of exclusivity of the arts, which we have been talking now for I don't know how many decades, is actually becoming worse. Is funding is going to go down the trend. So importantly, our respondents, when we ask them about solutions, they don't believe that more money alone is the only solution. They actually very much attentive to what, who has access to these resources, under what conditions, and to what ends. And there is a strong call also for investment in collective resilience, no matter how much we are skeptical about these words, but there is a huge need to invest in solidarity, which is also across borders, in networks, in collective bargaining, in associations, in collective practices, advocacy, capacity building, and basically to build this common shared infrastructure in order to survive these times. So there is also understanding that there is a lot of peer censorship going on against this backdrop. Our cultural institutions and organizations, they're basically losing this role also in the eyes of each other to be the spaces for controversy, spaces for plurality, ambiguity, for criticism, spaces that can actually make freedom to be exercised. It is important to protect freedom, but it also needs to be exercised. It needs to be accommodated, hosted, it needs a home. So can cultural institutions these days be these spaces for lived freedom in order to help policymakers to overcome this crisis of honesty? Or let's put it in more positive terms. Can Europe see cultural institutions as allies to achieve this independence, this freedom, this courage that it is talking about? In our report, we put several policy recommendations. Here in the presentation, I just would like to highlight 4 key principles. And I really invite you to look at the report, to look at the concrete recommendations. The first one is that performing arts should be treated as a public good. In fact, arts and culture should be treated as a public good. And here we're talking about access to arts, not only as audiences, as consumers, but also as creators, as active agents. This is what democracy is all about. The second one is about cultural rights and artistic freedom are ecosystemic. This is highlights the link between the two. So we should stop understanding artistic freedom in a very narrow sense of basically censoring existing voices, because freedom from censorship for existing voices is not really a freedom, it is a privilege. So here we need to recognize that artistic freedom is embedded in a very complex set of rights. It is about labor rights, social security, it is about education, it is about housing, it is also about climate, it's about equality policies, immigration policy. There are so many other policies. So this topic needs to be addressed within cultural policy, but also taken out of this bubble. And the third, in times of polycrisis, international and supranational bodies matter more than ever. When we ask our respondents about solutions, an overwhelming majority of them actually looks at the European Union, no matter how limited its competency is in the field of culture, and also at UNESCO, in the sense of space where we can uphold values, space that can help us to stay connected across borders, to build solidarity, to build this infrastructure, this collective resilience that we need. So there is a huge responsibility for these bodies to play. And finally, rhetoric is no longer enough. This is not new because rhetoric is never enough. However, first of all, we need, of course, to recognize rhetorical victories as well, symbolic victories, to celebrate all the declarations which talk about culture as a public good, because this is also a victory. This is important because in places where culture is not being recognized at all, this is essential. However, we need to urgently work on narrowing the gap between rhetoric, or let's say symbolic commitments, and the practice. We need to urgently move to action. So if Europe speaks today about independence, honesty, and freedom, culture cannot remain at the level of rhetoric. So it must be treated as the living infrastructure of democracy. Culture needs to be protected, it needs to be enabled, celebrated, and trusted, not only in practice, but also in action. This is our report. Thank you very much. And here I'm happy to, first of all, stop sharing my screen, and secondly, to pass the floor to Alice Bruno, coordinator of Circus Strada.
Thank you, Elena, for such a clear and insightful presentation with a lot of dark side and a lot of hope. I'm sure many of you have tons of reactions and questions now, but before we open the discussion, we would like to focus for a moment on the policy perspective. As Elena just mentioned, the main goal of his report is not just to document what is happening on the ground, but also to provide concrete policy recommendations to move to action. This brings us to the European Cultural Strategy. Published by the European Commission last November, the European Cultural Compass ambition is to serve as a framework to guide EU cultural policy in the coming years. The Compass sends a very strong signal we cannot not agree with culture is not a luxury, but a public good and a key pillar of democratic resilience. And as Elena already mentioned, one of its central commitments is safeguarding artistic freedom alongside promoting cultural participation and protecting cultural rights. Therefore, we are very pleased to welcome Catherine Magnan, head of the Cultural Policy Unit at the European Commission's Directorate General for Education and Culture. Catherine, we look forward to hearing your thoughts on the report. We are also keen to hear on the role of the EU cultural policy in strengthening democracy and how the Cultural Compass can help not only document and monitor the situation, but also protect, and sometime we heard from the report, rebuild artistic freedom and cultural rights. Catherine, the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup, Alice. Thank you very much. And I hope that the sound is okay. So first, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be with you. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I wanted to say up from the start that Elena, it's always a pleasure to read you. You draft in a very clear manner, but I now know that it's also a pleasure to listen to you because you really present in an extremely clear and convincing way. So well done. Now, I want to say that we're very pleased to see that, those networks putting themselves together, joining efforts to produce this report. And we understand it's only the first report. You'll have more coming up. And I think it's an excellent step. It's immensely useful to us when a sector can speak with a collective voice on anything, but especially on important matters like the one we're hearing and we're discussing today. And so, well done. Now, I'm very pleased to have the occasion to be able to comment on the report and explain what we're doing. I don't have a PowerPoint. I don't have a fully written presentation. You call for honesty. This is going to be a honest conversation. I have notes. I was reading the report, again, rereading until late yesterday evening, and I want to share my thought, but I still will try and structure them. So first, I will try and tell you how the report resonates with us. Then I will have a few questions on the report. There were a few things that caught my attention that I want to share with you and discuss. And then I will try and explain how we are responding, we, the European Commission, with the Compass, to the calls and the call for action that your report is all about. So, first, the reactions on the report, it certainly resonates deeply with us. And it arrives at a moment when questions on democratic resilience are at the forefront of policy discussions in Europe, at a moment when the world order is shifting before our eyes at an amazing speed. And so it's extremely important to stop and try and make sense of what's happening at an amazing speed and devise remedies or action. Also, what resonates deeply with us is the fact that we think that culture is not peripheral to democracy, but part of its foundation. That comes across very clearly in your report, and I think you will have understood that it also comes across clearly in the Cultural Compass. Indeed, we are witnessing that culture has increasingly become a target of hybrid threats, disinformation, and even sometimes direct military threats to our cultural heritage, like it's happening in Ukraine and in other parts of the world and sometimes Europe. I'm also very sorry to say that even within our own EU member states, we keep getting reports, articles, and testimonies that there are undue interferences sometimes affecting the independence of the cultural institutions and the misuse of the so-called morality laws, for example, or censorship and intimidation of artists. And for me, the most moving in the report and the most worrying was the mention of self-censorship. That's the most terrible and also the most difficult to measure, actually. It can only be measured in the way you did through a survey asking artists whether they self-censor themselves. But that's it's an invisible consequence, yet it has to be measured, and it's a very, very worrying one. Now you say many things in the report about performing arts and how important they are for democracy and how a special vehicle they are to share and confront difficult truth in society. You articulate this very clearly in your report, and I also already want to mention that because of the specific role of performing arts, we in the Compass have announced this new prize for performing arts. I'm sure you've noticed that. It's been a call from the sector for a very long time, and it's finally going to happen. So a European prize for performing arts, but that's also for cultural reasons, not only for the role of those sectors in withstanding or strengthening our democracy. I also find extremely valuable the fact that you have documented the lived experiences of practitioners living in the field. And I understand that we will be listening to more testimonies later during these events, and that's extremely important. So we see the report as resonating with our own conclusions, our own analysis. We see the report as important because it gives the sector and a very particular sector a voice for their concerns, and it can help us shape, the conversation, but also the response. And I will also tell you what steps we are considering. And it's important to build evidence. And even though, Elena, you were very careful in saying this report is a snapshot, it's a signal, it's not scientifically, because your sample was proportionally relatively small, yet it contributes adding to the body of evidence that we are collecting. Now, let me share with you what came to my mind when reading the report, where I had some questions, and one of the questions was the place of performing arts. I had the impression that in the report, sometimes arts and culture were used almost as a synonymous of performing arts and the reverse as well. So is it because performing arts, the conclusions that you reach for performing arts can be extended to culture and the arts through evidence that you have? Or is it, in short, were you making a point for arts and culture in general, or were you making a point for the situation of performing arts? And that's where I was not entirely comfortable. Of course, you are entitled to extend or expand your findings about performing arts to culture and arts in general. Yet there was a leap sometimes, or I wasn't sometimes entirely sure of how you construct that. Also, for me, I would have liked to hear more about performing arts specifically, because what I want to say is that you specifically say, performing arts are very special. Performing arts have a very specific role to play. Do they? I want to hear more. I want to be convinced. Why? Let me read you an extract. So that's an extract from the study, and where it is said, barriers to public engagement. What are the barriers to public engagement with the performing arts? Because you say artistic freedom is a holistic notion, and we must look at it from different angles. Meaning, if you don't have public engagement, you cannot have full artistic freedom or full cultural rights. And you said barriers to public engagement with the performing arts are ticket price, physical, sensory communication inaccessibility, lack of infrastructure, social distance. This is not for me. Austerity. But I think museums could say the same, no? What is there that is so special to performing arts? Or is there something extremely special to performing arts? When it comes to, performing arts being vehicles for difficult truth in society, what about books? What about films? And also I remember, at one point I worked on third countries, and in one of those countries, it was Iran. At the time, I don't want to speak for now, but at the time when I was dealing with those issues, which is a good 15 years ago, theater was not a concern. You had some sort of freedom of thought in the theater world. Why? Because that was not a mass tool, mass communication tool. Music was a concern when it came to freedom. Books were a concern, but theater, there was a small circle which could do rather, there was a little pocket of freedom in a way. So, again, the report is super interesting, but those are questions that I ask myself when reading it. And then my second remark would be about the holistic approach to artistic freedom and cultural rights. So indeed, you quote UNESCO. You say that artistic freedom cannot be understood or equated to censorship only. We need to look at also, freedom of association, that's for sure, but also social economic rights to participate in cultural life. Then you speak about cultural rights, which also are about freedom of movement, labor rights, public funding. It is true. However, for a policymaker, and it's not always easy to act on those matters, labeling them as artistic freedom. I can just imagine, if we want to work on the working conditions of artists, and we go to colleagues dealing with employment at national or wherever level, and we say, hey, it's also, we want to do that because it's also about artistic freedom. It is, but that's not going to be a language that's going to convince colleagues in charge of employment. Same thing with regard to funding. Yes, funding is essential for artists to be able to express themselves. If they cannot, receive funding, they cannot express themselves very often. But you also mentioned, for example, bureaucratic obstacles. I'm not going to be able to convince people in charge of procedures that the bureaucratic or the fact that you have to fill in 2 forms or 3 forms will do a huge change for artistic freedom. So what I want to say is that it's all true. It's good for a researcher, for an analysis, or for us when we discuss, the cultural compass, to take a holistic approach. When it comes to action, one has to accept that some actions will be limited to some fields and with a different language, not always pertaining to artistic freedom. Whereas, of course, when you take the helicopter view, it can be understood as contributing or being conditions to artistic freedom. That's what I wanted to say on the report. Now, how are we responding to the issues that you've highlighted? And since I said that the report resonates with us, and as Alice pointed out, some of the issues are reflected in the cultural compass, this new strategy that we've put together. So what concretely are we going to do with regard to the points that you make? Well, first, We do mention artistic freedom a lot in the Cultural Compass, and we say that we're going to produce regularly a state of culture report where we are going to monitor specifically artistic freedom. So there will be, concrete action or, more regular monitoring, and that will be translated into the Cultural Compass. The State of Culture report. Now, we don't know exactly how we're going to organize that monitoring. We are working on it, but I cannot be more precise at this stage. One thing, though, is absolutely clear. We will do that in dialogue with you, with the sectors, and through inter alia, the structured dialogue, which is also the one of the actions that the Compass announces. What are we going to do as well? Well, we are going to work on access. I mean, what is foreseen in the Compass is especially, with regard to youth. As I said, we're going to have this prize for performing arts. We will also try and simplify EU funding, which is one of your call and one of the, flagship actions of the Compass. We have, when it comes to budget, called for more budgets. The Commission puts together a bold proposal for Agora EU, the new funding program. Let's see what the negotiations with the member states and the Parliament will bring. But certainly, we increase the funding for our proposal. Proposes an increased funding for Agora EU. And also, last but certainly not least, we are going to work on an EU artist charter. And that's a deliverable that we would like to produce still this year. And as you said, with this holistic approach, the working conditions of artists are one of the facets or the conditions for artistic freedom and cultural rights. So we have an ambitious program that we have to deliver, and I hope that we will manage, because it's quite a long list. Now,
Catherine, we have to slowly round up.
Sure, and that's where I wanted to finish, saying that I hope that, one of the things you say in the report is that rhetoric is no longer enough. So I hope that at least for us, for our part, we've started delivering, or we will, we really have this intention to go beyond the rhetoric of the Cultural Compass and deliver on a number of very concrete flagships that respond to some of the calls of the report. With this, I'm stopping and handing over the word back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine Magnan. Thanks for this honest set of thoughts and questions that we will for sure get back in our Q&A further on in this session. It's almost time to you, the audience. Themes of political pressure, of self-censorship, of the risk of political reframing of culture are on our agendas. We heard it from Elena, and we know it ourselves as trends, as realities that we are living in different contexts in different parts of Europe and of the world. And before we are coming and taking up the questions that are coming into our chat, and we are following and monitoring them, let us hear, as Louise, you said at the beginning, from 5 further examples of contributors that live in different kinds of realities and witness these kind of topics in a very personal way. 5 contributions and contributors that the PAC partners have proposed. Each of them will speak 5 minutes, bringing in a very specific case, context, idea, and I think enriching our conversation even further. And let me bring you or take you a little bit throughout these 5 contributors. We start with a very, very concrete example that probably all of us have heard about, the BITEF Festival in Belgrade, brought to us by Ksenia Djurovic, BITEF's executive director, taking us through the 1,000-piece puzzle of navigating non-cultural policies in terms of very turbulent times and revolt. 2, Gintare Mastaikato, who is reflecting on the urgent call developed in Lithuania on the threat of democratic values, freedom of expression, and cultural autonomy. leading us to a perspective that is not only broadening the geographical scope of our discussion, but also bringing an important transnational and diasporic dimension with Azadeh Ghanishev from Iran to us, to innovative actions and policy measures in Norway that help us understand what it takes to put actions behind policy priorities of access to culture, brought to us by Matthias Hilmar Hiversen, and a concluding reflection from theater director Haris Pasovic, based in Sarajevo, Bosnia. I did this introduction, in order not to do it once again, because the following procedure will happen. We will not introduce the speakers again one by one, but we will help you to understand their backgrounds by posting more information about them, each of them, into the chat. The 5 speakers are very well equipped and trained to hand over from one another. And the only moment you will hear back or see me back in this beautiful red window is, if at all, when one of you guys will speak, or girls, one of you will speak more than 5 minutes. Then I will come with a very horrible sound and interrupt you very ungently. The floor is yours, dear Xenia. I hand over to you.
Thank you, Katrin. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for your presence today, and a big thank you to the organizers. It's a pleasure and an honor, obviously, to be in such important company to share our experiences in a tumultuous time. I'll try to present you with a possible example of threats to artistic freedoms through sharing with you the circumstances of last year's BITA Festival. So in 2025, the Belgrade International Theatre Festival, one of Europe's longest-running avant-garde theatre festivals, became emblematic of the pressures facing contemporary art institutions. For nearly 6 decades, BITA served as a space for progressive artistic practices and cultural critique, transcending political borders and encouraging provocative discourse on social issues. What we have faced are changes in legislature, which meant that the legal framework which guides the realization of the festival was changed, so that the function of the artistic director is entirely erased and the city-appointed board manages the festival now. Financial marginalization and leadership changes meant that the previous festival leadership underwent termination or non-renewal of mandates due to supporting the student-led protests in the country. The budget was halved without explanation or arguments. There was also a broader culture sector pressure. Cultural organizations in Serbia have experienced funding cuts, restrictions on political expression for artists, and even closure or restructuring of historic institutions when they publicly align with civic movements. Political intervention in artistic programming meant that the newly appointed board of BITEF rejected an entire proposed program, including the latest show by Milo Rau, reportedly because certain works or artistic figures were considered undesirable. These events further resulted in resignations and protests. The co-curators resigned rather than oversee a censored program, signaling that institutional autonomy had been greatly compromised. These events meant that there was no structural basis for the 59 BITEF to happen. This was the first time since its founding that BITEF was not realized. Civil war, NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, and global financial crisis were managed by the festival, but last year's events were impossible to override and create a relevant BITEF. In practical terms, artistic freedoms can be seen through autonomy of curatorial decision-making, protection from retaliation, and legal and policy safeguards. All of these 3 pillars were completely torn down, and consequentially, there was no institutional festival. The response of the theater community was to say a very loud no to censorship and self-organize to create a Ne-BITEF, which was a grassroots attempt at defending artistic freedoms. In 2025, Ne-BITEF emerged as a collective act of necessity created in direct response to political interference. Faced with the loss of institutional space for critical and experimental work, artists, cultural workers, and audiences mobilized independently. Ne-BITEF demonstrated how artistic freedom can be preserved through community self-organization when formal structures fail. Without institutional backing, official funding, or hierarchical governance, the initiative relied on solidarity, shared resources, and trust. Programming decisions were made horizontally, reaffirming a core principle that artistic judgment belongs to artists and cultural professionals, not political bodies. And as a grassroots initiative, Nebitif redefined cultural participation because audiences were not passive consumers, but active supporters. In this sense, Nebitif reclaimed culture as a shared public responsibility and not a managed product. It's important to say that Nebitif was not only a protest, but a practical alternative. Performances, discussions, and gatherings were realized through partnerships with independent venues, informal networks, and volunteer labor. This transformed vulnerability into agency and showed that culture can persist under conditions of pressure, but not without cost. Nebitif should not be romanticized as a sustainable replacement for public institutions. Its significance lies elsewhere. It exposes the fragility of artistic freedom and demonstrates that when institutions are compromised, communities will organize to protect cultural rights. Nebitif stands as a reminder that artistic freedom survives not because it's guaranteed, but because it is defended, collectively, visibly, and in public. BITIF does more than reveal tensions at one festival. It reveals systemic vulnerabilities in the conditions that support artistic freedom and cultural rights. The crisis highlights how pressures can suppress creativity and marginalize critical voices. Reversing these trends requires a multi-layered approach where legal protections, funding integrity, institutional independence, and public engagement converge to secure culture as a true public good protected from arbitrary political pressure. Thank you all. And I pass the mic to Gintare now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Ksenia. I'm happy to present the case from Lithuania, which started in 2025 fall. So the Lithuanian government gave control of a Ministry of Culture to a political party called Nemuno Aušra. This party is populistic and connected with anti-European, anti-Semitic, and pro-Kremlin ideas. The culture sector reacted strongly. It began with petition that gathered more than 80,000 signatures in a few days and lead to the creation of a new cultural movement called the Culture Assembly. The movement brought together hundreds of cultural institutions, organizations, and independent artists together. We united to defend culture as a foundation of security, democracy, and a freedom of expression from very beginning. The entire movement was value-based. Even the politicians started us to bring the conversation about the budgets and money. We have asked all the experts and culture professionals to stay in their positions and working groups, even they were against the new Minister of Culture. In October 5th, the Culture Assembly organized the warning strike, the largest protest in independent Lithuanian history, and it included more than 300 events in 81 cities in Lithuania and 22 countries abroad. This showed that the issue was not only local, it was international and widely supported. The Culture Minister resigned after 1 week. The new Vice Minister was appointed, and after the strong public reaction, he resigned after 3 days. A little more than 1 month later, after like a quite strong pressure from our side, the Social Democrats took control of the Ministry of Culture again back. We have asked for dialogue, and we wanted to talk to them and to work on a culture policy together, but actually they refused. From October 21 to November 21st, the Culture Assembly organized We Are the Culture, a month of peaceful and creative actions. The goal was to remind the people that the culture is a space for freedom, dialogue, resistance against anti-democratic ideas. The protest grew beyond the culture. Many different groups joined, including like scientists, journalists, healthcare workers, trade unions, students, and etc. They said that this was not only about the culture, but about the future of the country as well. Independent regional assemblies began to emerge, raising the regional issues and proactively supporting the work and initiatives of the Central Assembly. We started to visit each of the regional assemblies as well. In the end of November, the government proposed new changes to the law about the public broadcaster. It was another attempt to expand political control over public media and weaken media independence. The Culture Assembly joined journalists in protesting. The biggest protest had more than 40,000 people. The longest lasted 3 days. At the same time, the government approved the 3 years budget plan, and it happened in the end of the year, and culture funding was reduced sharply. We are talking about the minus 60 million. I want to just to tell you that Lithuania is 2.9 million people, so it's a huge cut. This, if it will happen in 2028, it mainly will hurt independent culture sector, which Nemuno Aušra, this pro-Kremlin party, has criticized as a mistake of a Lithuanian independent period. The cuts also will affect it independent and regional media, and it's already affecting. By the end of the year, the Culture Assembly transformed into a long-term civic movement with the main three goals: strengthening the civic responsibility and engagement, working with the regional communities and create regional assemblies to develop and protect culture policy. The main leaders of the movement are people from culture field like contemporary dance, film, theater, visual arts, journalists, creative industry. In the short time, the movement have already achieved important success. The Ministry of Culture returned to non-populistic control. 12 regional assemblies were created and started working, and more to come. The proposed law changed the public broadcaster were temporarily stopped. This is a strong success for civil society and the culture community. And I want to share with you 10 lessons we have learned during the process. First, organize, form a body and make a structure. Second, you are in politics and you have to admit it. Learn from the other countries alike, like we did from Slovakia and Hungary. Be sharp, short and clear. Be water, my friend. It means avoid cliches. Build community. Be physically present with people. Speak your own language. Take your own space. Journalists are your friends, so you have to take time and to talk to them. Seek maximum results with minimum resources, and do not get used to evil. The culture community learned quickly, but we have to act proactively. We realize that the culture must be brought closer to people across the country. We also realized they need to talk with people directly, especially in the regions where the fear is strong. The movement will not
slowly round up.
Yes, so we are not finishing. We will continue to at least 1 year till the next elections, and we can talk later on more about it. And I'm happy to pass the word to Azad Ghanieh from Iran.
Thank you. So I start with an example about Iran, but it's not really an example. So I would like to say, here I am, Azadeh, sitting in front of you on this screen with my mixed hybrid body, which is physically present in Germany while Iran appears after my name in your program. This already raises a question: who am I here? And you can check the chat, but beyond that, who am I trying to be in this space? So today I'm trying to have a voice or a reflection on this report, which is deeply needed and eye-opening. And it mainly reflects on Europe and partly on artists at risk or displaced people like me who stand on a threshold, on a schwelle between being outed and being conditionally accepted as insiders. I have always been in an in-between. For more than 20 years, our collective and I have tried to create spaces for rehearsing the right of appearance, freedom of expression, dialogue, and empowerment through outdoor performances. This, I believe, has also been an everyday practice of resistance and survival for our Iranian audiences, to continuously try to reclaim the right to perform in the body you choose and not the body projected onto you, to gather with aesthetics you choose and not those forced on you, and to express yourself freely in public space, to exist, all practiced through democratic means while being met with backlash from the non-democratic tyrannical regime of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In the past 20 days, the state and its military forces have transformed these outdoor spaces, spaces of encounter, assembly, and performance, into slaughter spaces for nonviolent protesters. Streets, squares, and public spaces have become sites of brutal, bloody state mass killing, and I cannot separate these spaces from our stage. I cannot separate my being from my performing arts practice. I cannot separate my body from these facts, my presence here, my voice, and my work in outdoor arts. So what we call public space, what we call performance, what we call artistic freedom, these are of course not abstract concepts. I speak as an in-between artist standing between a stage in a non-democratic state and a democracy in danger, as mentioned in the report, as we feel it in every possible way in our practice. Democracy worldwide has been in a steady decline for over a decade. I feel the urge to share this, not only to call for witness, but also to help prevent this decline. In Iran, a strict system of surveillance and certification is established under the cover of evaluation and quality improvement. And to a little bit give an insider information to Catherine from an Iranian point of view, it has been practiced for more than 60 years and was never lower or higher. It was always a practice of the power. At the first step of creating a space of interaction, you are asked to give your text and everything you have to the censorship committee. And you may call the first step self-censorship, but this term I find problematic because it places agency and responsibility on the artist, while censorship, as also defined in this report, is produced through fear, vulnerability, and precarious conditions created by dominant powers. So our decision was to go outdoor, and we decided to go outdoor to reach those who are not only excluded from theater spaces, but who also do not experience state-funded venues as safe places for dialogue. Circus and outdoor art perform an important political action. They distance themselves especially from centers of power, from fixed class theater venues and conventional cultural spaces. They move into spaces of everyday life. They come to neighborhood and they create new centers with and for people. Outdoor performing arts are therefore in a very vulnerable position when states seek more restrictions, regulations, and control over public spaces. Agents of the state, police, architecture, urban planning already shape everyday life for our audiences. When they normalize polarization, erase particular identities, and practice violence against gatherings and demonstrations, our space of performance and appearance is directly affected. When we advocate for artistic freedom in our performances, we are advocating for action and freedom for everyone, everywhere. So our experience was to make the structure that opposes freedom visible, not only through talking, but also through performance. Never do code changing and involve your audience in the process of creation to rehearse imagination and democracy. Thank you so much. And I pass to Matthias.
Thank you so much. My name is Matthias. I am the General Director of Kulturtanken, which is the governmental organization responsible for the cultural school bag. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak here. We have the responsibility for ensuring that children in Norway can experience, participate in, and create arts and culture. And this includes overall responsibility for the Cultural School Bag program. Kulturtanken reports to the Ministry of Culture and Equality and cooperates closely with the Ministry of Education and Research. The Cultural School Bag is funded primarily through surplus from the National Lottery, which contributed approximately 34 million euro in the last year to the Cultural School Bag, and it's further supported by nearly 26 million euro in additional resources from county and local municipalities. The national goals of the Cultural School Bag are to ensure that all children and young people have access to high-quality professional arts and culture, regardless of where they live. The program aims to offer a relevant and diverse range of artistic and cultural expressions to strengthen cultural inclusion and linguistic diversity and support pupils' education and formation in line with the national curriculum. The Cultural School Bag is a decentralized scheme. in which county authorities and municipalities are responsible for programming the content and reporting their activities to Kulturtanken. Kulturtanken holds the national responsibility for the development of the program and cooperates in facilitating areas for showcasing production, as well as for professional discussions on artistic quality for the target group. Kulturtanken also operates a digital portal where artists and cultural producers apply for the program, where regional and local administrators plan and coordinate touring activities, and where schools receive information about upcoming visits. Each year, the Cultural School Bag reaches more than 800,000 pupils across Norway and involves around 4,000 professional artists and mediators. Artistic production developed within the Cultural School Bag program often reappear in other contexts, such as cultural centers or libraries offering activities for children. In this way, the program contributes to strengthening and expanding the arts and cultural landscape for the target group, also beyond the program itself. The Cultural School Bag is more than a distribution system for arts in schools. It's a democratic vehicle in that it ensures that all children in Norway's schools from age 6 to 18, regardless of geography, background, or socio-economic circumstances, are given access to high-quality professional arts experiences. Every pupil and student gets 2 to 3 arts encounters each year, either at the schools or visiting a museum, a theater, a concert hall, so on. And this helps to remove barriers to participation, to ensure that cultural engagement is not confined to those who can afford tickets, travel, or private opportunities. The Cultural School Bag ensures that children and young people have access to art and culture, regardless of their socio-economic background or where they live. Through this universal access, the Cultural School Bag aims to strengthen children's cultural rights, to provide artists with a platform for free and diverse speech, and artistic expression, and cultivate the habits of reflection, dialogue, and curiosity that are essential for resilient and inclusive democracy. So, by integrating arts experiences into the school day, the Cultural School Bag tries to ensure that participation in the arts is a natural and expected part of every pupil's education. It also provides continuity, giving children regular encounters with performing arts throughout their school years. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly the Articles 12 and 31, underlines that children have the right to take part in cultural experiences and in artistic life, and to have their opinions heard. And these rights require practical systems and structures to be realized in practice. Performing arts for young audiences helps support these rights by giving children meaningful opportunities to engage with culture. So we recognize and must recognize that children and young people are not only future citizens, but citizens today, and their cultural rights include expressing themselves, experiencing art that reflects their lives, questioning the world around them, and taking part in shared cultural experiences. Performing arts offer spaces where children can explore ideas, perspectives, and emotions. They encourage curiosity, empathy, imagination, and they show how dialogue and reflection contribute to a vibrant society. Providing performing arts for children is therefore an important way to support participation and inclusion in cultural life and to support democracy. This is my presentation for you today, very quickly, and I will now leave the word over to Aris Pasovic, I think.
Yes, thank you, Matthias. Thank you for the organizers of this event, this conversation, because I think it's very appropriate and timely in the age when we experience so many changes in Europe, and not only the war which is ongoing in Ukraine and marks so much of our activity everywhere in Europe, but also everything what's going on from Iran to the United States. We see that we are very much in a very deep change that all affects our work. Also, the rapid development of artificial intelligence will impact artistic freedoms as well, and it's somehow time to redefine and rethink what is artistic freedom. We are not in the state of the war, but we are not in this complete peace either. And Katrin Deventer and I were in the conference in Berlin a few months ago, big international conference, where some participants said that the artists in Europe should start working with the generals more often. I mean, this is exactly the quote of one of the speakers who said this. Another speaker asked whether the artists, the festivals, the artistic institutions should apply for sponsorship to the arms producers and arms dealers. So these are the subjects that we didn't discuss a few years ago. It wouldn't be unimaginable to have these kind of discussions in any conference, and leave alone the conference when the artists take place as well. So lots of us, I mean, not me particularly, but many people who in culture work in the institutions. They are state institutions. They are in this or another way controlled by the government. Often the directors themselves are appointed by the governments. So they have to reflect in this or another way the government policy. We see that the government policies are now very different. What was also unimaginable to think that we will be discussing whether it's possible or not to say something in Germany in 10 years ago. Now it's a question. It's more complicated, you know. During and after the conflict between Israel and Palestine, we experienced in Europe, you know, this issue that was a very dramatic in a way. You know, what is possible to say, what is not possible to say, what is in the line with the government policy, what is not, what is the artistic freedom, what is not. So I think, you know, that dialogue like this one is key for understanding all these new processes that nobody of us can really understand fully without exchanging with others and their experiences. There was one question here posed, written by Philip Bishop, and I believe that it's Philip from Switzerland, who asked why exactly arts is important for democracy. And I think it's a very legitimate question. Is it really arts important for democracy? Because in history, we have different answers on this question. In early stage, of developed arts in Europe, like ancient Greek drama, we had arts as the state establishment which was set to complement democracy. And it was very important, and until today it is important what they did. But then for a long period, for about 23 centuries, art was not necessarily free. Art was often, you know, in connection with the government, with the religion, and so on. And still we had wonderful and big pieces of art. But everything changed in the 20th century. And the first time when artistic freedom has been recognized as important was Weimar Constitution in 1919, right after the First World War. So we are coming to the century of the wars, where artistic freedom has been recognized as something which is key for the democratic development. Unfortunately, this was not enough, what was written in a Weimar Constitution. We know that, you know, another massive and most horrible totalitarianism came to Europe in 40s. But then we had universal, the Declaration of Universal Human Rights after the Second World War that reconfirmed this. I believe, you know, that in today's world, when we experienced in the last 30 years, again, a genocide in Bosnia, genocide against Bosnian Muslims, the sieges of the cities, when we had the killing the heritage, literally, you know, the old bridge in Mostar, the National Library in Sarajevo, later the Buddhas in Afghanistan, they were literally killed. And that means that even it's now something very paradoxical, perhaps controversial, what I will say, but the enemy of freedom confirms that artistic freedom is so important for democracy. And
thank you, Haris. I'm going to have to
something
ask you
that,
to round up.
sure, that's something that I believe that we will continue to discuss in the future. Thank you, Asha.
Thank you so much, Haris. And thank you, dear speakers, for your massive amount of knowledge, insights, honesties, and realities that you have been sharing with the room. Thank you ever so much. I'm the last of the PAC members to appear on the screen, and I have gotten the role to facilitate sharing your thoughts and answers. Unfortunately, we've gone quite a bit over time, so it's going to be short and concise, and we will not have time to respond to everything, but we will do our best to share everything that has been shared in the chat in our follow-up email to all participants. And rest assured, the conversation about this is just starting. First up, I'm gonna give Elena Polviseva an opportunity to respond to the questions that Katrin Manyan, in her full honesty, posed to us. And in that regard, someone has shared their reflection on that in the chat, and I will start by reading that out. When economic pressures rise and social empathy declines, democracy often becomes more fragile. In response to Ms. Magnan's point, I strongly believe that in our practice, the performing arts play a particular direct role and a front line as a public good, a creation of spaces of public participation, enabling collaborations with health sector and social sector to build wider and more resilient alliances. So thank you for this comment in the chat, but over to you, Lena, to respond on our behalf regarding our research.
Thank you, Auze, and thank you, Katrin. I hope you are still here because I just don't see you. Yes, you're there. Thank you for your questions and for your reactions. And first of all, also, thank you everyone who also added a lot of food for thought here. I think your first question was quite practical about the focus on performing arts, whether a unique focus or not. I think here the explanations could be a few, and the first one is very, very simple, is that we wrote in the report what came up through the survey. So we didn't necessarily ask professionals to think about their very unique performing arts professions. So they share testimonials which refer to them as people in the field. So this is a snapshot of what is happening in the performing arts. At the same time, we haven't done similar exercises with a visual artist or with film professionals. We didn't survey museums. So we cannot really say 100% that this would be the same kind of challenge that they would share. And as we didn't do this research, now what I will say, it's a total speculation, but maybe film and visual artists and also literature professionals would be very concerned about AI, maybe even more than by censorship. Perhaps cultural heritage professionals are very concerned about energy transitions and about climate change effects and also about conflict that destroys heritage in other places. So there might have been other questions and other topics which would have come up. At the same time, when I read some of the EU papers about music in times of Music Moves Europe or cultural heritage, there's a lot of things which we all share in the cultural sector. And I'm just even also wondering, do we have to really search for these very, very unique challenges? I think we could speak about unique values, but maybe unique challenges, it is a bit distorting the reality. If I think we need to ask these open questions, what actually matters to the sectors. There was a big focus in the report on public funding, not only on the amount of money, but also how and when, which conditions, etc. I think this might be something quite unique to the performing arts sector, which is one of the biggest beneficiaries of public funding. But at the same time, about unique value, This is a huge, difficult question to put someone like this who did not prepare to answer this question. But I do think that if we talk about democracy, since we're with that bubble, what does performing arts have to offer to democracy in unique terms? Impossible question to answer, right? Because whatever I will say would not be unique. But at the same time, I think it also depends on how do we define democracy? Because we talk about representativity. I mean, there are all these definitions which kind of are all in place. Because if we look at elections, which just change leaders across the world, democracy kind of works. I think what we probably missing, and this is a very historic long-term process, there is a collective imagination of the future. This is what democracy is. It's basically people can imagine a different future for not just for themselves, but for a collective. And for me, performing arts is a place of a shared experience. People come together, and it's also enacting freedom. So it's not just talking about freedoms. It's a real-time vulnerabilities. Performing arts is a real-time experience. It's quite unique in a way, in which people present themselves, present their ideas, involve public, and we're all stuck there in this experience to live it through. And as hopefully a side effect, we're all inspired to think about different futures. About holistic approach to artistic freedom, this is a less pathetic answer. I think it's very practical, actually, what we're talking about, because we need to measure artistic freedom somehow, and there have been a long history of measuring number of cases of censorship, which is extremely important. But I think of very soon, in some parts of the world, there might be nothing to measure anymore because people will not speak up and there will be a huge... and then do we conclude that artistic freedom is fine? I think it's a lot about how do we measure artistic freedom. And I think this measurement should be expanded to many other fields. The funding, the social security, and the list goes on. I totally understand that for policymakers, it might be overwhelming to read these recommendations. But as you said, as a researcher, and I think not only as researchers, but the Performing Arts Coalition is an advocacy platform. We say what we hear, so we try to convey, and we try to stay critical and open. And yeah, I think that's what I could share.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you so much for answering in so many things in such a short and concise way. And I'm now gonna pass the word over to you, Katrin, but I have a question from the participant from Simone Pulano, which is a question about cultural values. How can we really ensure that there is a real focus on cultural values? It seems to me that when talking about the relationship between democracy and culture and arts, the focus is often purely on participation in cultural activities, but rarely on what cultural values should guide those activities. What is your perspective on a European Commission-led policy study examining how culture and the arts influence democratic processes at the level of people's mindset? So this is a question for you, Katrin Magnan, if you would be so kind.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, very briefly, thank you, Elena, for your answers. I just wanted to push you guys, you know, I mean,
thank you for doing that.
Usually it's us always, you know, I mean, you should do
push
more,
each other,
etc. No, but I mean, you know, I think it's fantastic that you know, the 5 networks of performing arts are putting themselves together. And I just wanted to hold this mirror to you that when reading the reports, it's about arts and culture, but it's also about us. What is it? What do you want to do? Every answer will be fine. I just wanted to give you this mirror. And if there is a specificity for performing art, indeed, you know, I think a very specific dimension is the lived shared experience that you don't have with a book, you don't really have with a museum. So yes, I mean, there are specificities, and maybe, you know, in terms of advocacy, it's interesting to build on your strengths and your specificities, but there is no right or wrong answer. I mean, of course, you are also one of the witnesses and one of the actors of the cultural scene, and in that respect you can speak about, of course, culture and arts. But then now on the last question, I think from Simone, I think I've very respectfully, it's not at all rhetoric or provocation, but what are cultural values. I'm not sure. There are universal values. There are European values codified in declaration. I mean, freedom of speech, freedom of association, etc. Gender equality. What are cultural values? I'm really sorry. Maybe it's a question of wording. There are cultural rights, but I'm really not sure what to answer. I don't know what are cultural rights, and I don't want to play on words. I just don't know what are cultural rights. Cultural values. So I'm really sorry. It's not playing on words. It's just that I mean, you have far right writers. You have, there are no cultural values per se, no? But okay, maybe.
Well, let's continue the conversation, Katrien.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of very loaded concepts and things being shared in this room, and we don't have the full capacity to engage in everything. So let's look at this as the beginning of a conversation. I do want to give other people a chance, and we are really running out of time. So I would like to bring our perspective a little bit outside of Europe. And there is a question which I'm gonna ask Seti to respond to first. It's from Dimitri Martinez, who asks, what strategies can artists, cultural professionals, and arts association adopt to express solidarity with artists outside of Europe, and especially in the global South? So if you would like to respond, thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this question because it is a very important question. I may have been also surprised when I was invited to share here because, of course, I'm not from, or I am and I'm not, as I said, I'm an in-between person. But I find it also very much appropriate because what we can do, first of all, us who experienced this horrific non-liberal situation, is to share what we found out, to give signs, and as I said, to help prevention. So of course, it's also these reports, but also experiences from the field to help prevent. And then what is very helpful in solidarity with people who are already experiencing is to collaborate, is to make communications, is to understand from the field, from the scene, from the reality of the ground they are acting inside, what they are going through and what are their demands. Furthermore, to involve them in creating these solidarity circles, because it is very important. There is this feeling that, yes, we have the urge or we need solidarity, but sometimes it is created in an abstract way out of the country, without real communication, without really asking what is the demand, what is the need. And sometimes international organizations, when they start collaborations, when they start opening gates for people from non-democratic situations or authoritarian states to come out and perform, to exchange, they also follow a method of gatekeeping, because they always contact the same groups, the same people, the same organizations, going through all these very well-established state-based organizations. I believe there is a need to contact communities. There is a need to make connections with NGOs, with kind of more self-structured organizations rather than state organizations. I hope that I gave an answer to this question.
Thank you. Yes, you did. Thank you so much. And certainly art should not have any boundaries, and neither should we. And that is the purpose of networks like ours. All of us work well beyond the European borders. And we are increasingly reaching out in this day and age to our colleagues and friends and partners in all corners of the world. And I do believe we networks, and especially since we're now working in a more structured manner together, have ample enough opportunity to do so even further. It is now 1 minute to go. And I am being from the north, I'm very much adamant of being on time, respecting people's times. So we will, as I said, try our very best to share everything that has been shared in the chat in our follow-up mail with you. It's been hugely enriching to hear all of you. And now I'm going to give the word to our colleague, Louis, who will do the closing remarks. Thank you so much, and stay tuned for more from PAC.
Yeah, thank you, Asa. Yeah, we organizing this, we thought we need an opening and closure by the same, but maybe we should be a bit post-dramatic about this. Anyway, I have the word, and I just want to, we have said thank you to the speakers, and we have really felt kind of how diverse the concept is that we're talking about, and how complex we need to consider this when talking about cultural rights. And I want, as Asa as well, stress. No, first I want to say thank you to all you who participated, and I really hope we can see you next time, not only in the chat, and that's the job we have each of our networks to have a deeper conversation in smaller rooms and get your responses and see you and hear you, and then bring that knowledge into our conversations on a European level. That's really our role. So hope to see you more next time, and there's a lot of work to do to put action behind vision and really interpret this concept into something we can really do for cultural freedom, but also for access, bridging national actions and European actions. No more words for us. Thank you for all the speakers. Thank you to Catherine. Thank you to the listeners. We hope to see you soon again.